My name is Kaylee Patterson. I'm 32 years old and I own a logistics tech company that's quietly become one of the fastest growing in the Southeast. You wouldn't know that if you asked my family, though, because to them, I've always been the invisible one, the one who didn't shine bright enough to deserve attention. If you've ever sat at a dinner table full of people who are supposed to love you, only to feel like you're not even in the room, then you'll understand exactly what I'm about to tell you. At the family dinner, my father stood up and shouted at me in front of everyone, "You're completely useless and not worth investing in." My mother followed right behind, snapping, "Get out and figure out how to survive on your own." The words cut deep, but I didn't scream back. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I just smiled, pushed back my chair, walked straight out the door, and never looked back. They had no idea that I was already laying the foundation for something real, something that would one day approach $20 million in annual revenue. They had no idea their rejection would become the exact fuel I needed to build an entire life without them. That night wasn't the first time they chose my sister over me. It was just the moment the truth became impossible to ignore. And it was the moment I decided I was done waiting for their approval. If you've ever been told you weren't enough, if you've ever walked away from a family that refused to see your worth, stay with me, because what happened in the years that followed is something they never could have imagined. If this story resonates with you, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and drop a comment below. Have you ever had to walk away from people who didn't value you? Your experience might be the next story we share. Let's dive in. After that night, I left my parents' house in Charlotte with $300 in my pocket and a duffel bag that held everything I owned. The city lights faded in the rearview mirror as I drove toward the only place I could afford, a cheap motel on the edge of town where the rent was weekly, and nobody asked questions. For the first few months, survival meant taking whatever work was available right away. I started at a warehouse on the south side of the city, loading trucks from 3 in the afternoon until midnight, unloading pallets of freight that came in from ports up and down the East Coast. The pay was barely enough to cover food and gas, but it was steady and it kept me moving. When that shift ended, I picked up delivery routes for a local courier service, driving a beat-up van through traffic until 2 or 3 in the morning. Night after night, I learned every back road in Mecklenburg County and every shortcut that saved 5 minutes on a route. Exhaustion became normal, and sleep came in short bursts on the motel bed with the hum of the highway outside the window. I knew I couldn't stay on the road forever, so during the rare hours I had off, I started teaching myself to code. I used free online resources, tutorials on Python logistics scripts, and automation basics that I found through community forums. The more I learned, the clearer the idea became. There was a real gap in how small and mid-sized shippers in the Southeast managed their routes, tracked inventory, and predicted delays. Most of them still relied on spreadsheets and phone calls, while bigger players had expensive enterprise software they couldn't afford. I began sketching out a simple SaaS platform that could automate route optimization, inventory alerts, and basic predictive analytics for businesses that handled less than 100 shipments a day. It wasn't revolutionary, but it was practical, and it fit the needs of the exact companies I was delivering to every night. I kept the project quiet at first, building the first prototype on a second-hand laptop I bought for $200 from a pawn shop. I tested it with dummy data from my delivery routes and refined the algorithms until they started producing results that actually saved time. When the basic version was functional enough, I reached out to a couple of the smaller shippers I'd met through work, local distributors who handled groceries and building supplies around Charlotte. The first one was a family-owned company that ran 10 trucks a day. They agreed to try the tool for free in exchange for feedback. Within a week, they reported cutting fuel costs by 12% and reducing late deliveries by almost a third. That small win gave me confidence to approach the next one and then the next. I charged nothing at first, focusing instead on gathering testimonials and fixing bugs based on real user input. By the end of the first year, I had 5 paying customers, all local, all bootstrapped with no outside funding. Revenue was modest, just a few $1,000s a month, but it was enough to quit the night shifts, upgrade my laptop, and rent a tiny one-bedroom apartment near the airport where rent was cheaper and the commute to potential clients was shorter. I incorporated the business as a sole proprietorship, registered it with the state of North Carolina, and set up a basic website that explained the tool in plain language. Every spare minute went into adding features like real-time tracking integrations with common carriers and simple dashboards that didn't require a degree to understand. The platform grew slowly but steadily because it solved a problem I had lived with every day on the road. During those early years, I avoided any contact with my family. I changed my phone number, blocked old email addresses, and focused entirely on the work in front of me. There were moments when doubt crept in late at night when the apartment was quiet and I wondered if I had made the right choice walking away forever. But then I remembered the dinner table, the raised voices, the finality of that door closing behind me, and the doubt always faded. I had chosen to build something on my own terms, and every small milestone, every new customer, every positive review proved that decision was right. The company wasn't flashy. There were no big announcements, no venture capital parties. It was just steady progress fueled by the same grit that had kept me driving through the night years earlier. And as the second year turned into the third, I started to see that this quiet persistence was turning into something much larger than I had ever imagined. 5 years later, when I was 25, I returned to Charlotte for a family dinner at my parents' house for the first time since I left. The invitation had come through a cousin who still stayed in touch, and I accepted mostly out of curiosity to see how much had changed. The house looked exactly the same: the long oak table in the dining room, the same framed photos on the walls, and the same faint smell of my mother's pot roast filling the air. Relatives filled the chairs: cousins, aunts, and uncles chatting about jobs, kids, and the latest local news. I sat at the far end of the table, quiet as always, offering nods and short answers when someone asked how I was doing. The conversation turned to my older sister, Courtney Patterson, who was 30 at the time. She had moved up quickly at a regional sales firm after college, and my parents had never stopped talking about her promotions, bonuses, and the new house she bought in a nice suburb. That evening was no different. My father raised his glass midway through dinner and said, "We're so proud of Courtney. She's the successful one in this family, the one who actually made something of the investment we put in her." He glanced around the table with that familiar, satisfied smile and added, "Some kids take what you give them and build on it. Others just waste it." My mother nodded quickly, chiming in, "Courtney's VP of Regional Sales now, and she just closed a major account. That's what happens when you invest in the right child." The words landed heavy because they were almost identical to what my father had shouted 5 years earlier. Useless. Not worth investing in. I felt the old sting rise in my chest, but I kept my face calm and my hand steady on the napkin in my lap. Nobody noticed the shift in my expression, or if they did, they didn't say anything. The table kept moving forward with stories about Courtney's recent trip to Atlanta, her new car, and the way she had handled a difficult client. My parents beamed every time her name came up, and the rest of the family followed their lead, clapping and laughing along. I stayed through the main course and part of dessert, listening to the praise flow without interruption. At one point, my mother turned to me and asked, "So what are you doing these days?" "Kaylee." It was the first direct question anyone had directed at me all night. I answered simply, "I'm working on a small software project," and left it at that. Nobody followed up. The conversation slid right back to Courtney's latest achievement, as if my answer had been background noise. When the plates were cleared, I stood up quietly, thanked my mother for the meal, and said I had an early morning. My father looked up briefly and said, "Drive safe," without any real warmth. My mother gave me a quick hug at the door and whispered, "We hope you're doing okay, sweetie." I nodded. Once stepped outside into the cool Charlotte night and closed the door behind me. The drive back to my apartment felt longer than usual, but not because of traffic. It was the silence in the car, the way the old words still echoed even after all those years. I didn't feel angry anymore. Not the way I had when I first left. What I felt was something clearer, a quiet confirmation that nothing had changed on their side, and that was fine. I had spent 5 years building without their approval or their investment, and the company was starting to show real traction. Customers were renewing contracts, more people were signing up, and the numbers were trending in a direction that made the future look solid. Their praise for Courtney didn't diminish what I had accomplished. If anything, it made the contrast sharper and the path ahead even more certain. That dinner was the last time I sat at their table pretending to be part of a conversation that never included me. From then on, I chose distance not out of spite, but out of self-respect. The hurt was still there, but it no longer controlled me. It had become just another piece of the story I was writing on my own. 2 years after that dinner, the company had grown in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. What started as a side project with 5 part-time contractors had turned into a real operation with more than 40 full-time employees spread across development support, sales, and customer success. Revenue climbed steadily from $8 million the previous year to approaching $20 million annually as more mid-sized shippers in the Southeast signed on for the SaaS platform. The tool had expanded to include advanced features like AI-driven delay predictions, carrier integrations, and automated compliance reporting, which helped clients save time and reduce errors. Contracts were longer now, often multi-year, and renewals came in at rates above 90%. I stayed low profile as the founder, keeping my name out of press releases and industry events. I hired an experienced CEO from a larger logistics firm to handle day-to-day operations, public-facing responsibilities, and scaling the team. He was good at building structure, hiring senior leaders, and navigating investor conversations, even though we remained bootstrapped. This allowed me to focus on product vision, strategy, and the technical side while staying behind the scenes. The structure worked because the company felt professional without losing the practical, grounded approach that had gotten us this far. Meanwhile, Courtney's world was falling apart. Her sales role at the regional firm had seemed secure until the company restructured amid rising interest rates and supply chain disruptions. She lost her position along with a significant portion of her savings that had been tied up in company stock options that became worthless. The house she had bought at the height of the market went underwater, and she faced mounting credit card debt from maintaining appearances during better times. I learned about it indirectly through a distant cousin who mentioned the situation in passing, but Courtney herself didn't reach out until she had exhausted every other option. The call came late one evening while I was reviewing quarterly reports in my office. She started with small talk about the weather and family, then shifted to how things had gotten tough. She explained the layoff, the bills piling up, and how she needed something steady to get back on her feet. She asked if there were any openings at my company, anything entry-level would do. I listened without interrupting, and after a long pause I said, yes. There was a spot in admin support handling data, entry scheduling, and basic customer inquiries. It was far below her previous VP title, but the pay was fair, benefits were solid, and the hours were predictable. She hesitated for a moment, then accepted. I instructed HR to process her as a regular applicant with no special treatment, and I made sure she was placed in a different building from the executive team. She never knew I was the founder because I had kept my involvement minimal in internal communications, and she worked in a support role that rarely crossed paths with leadership. Her first day was unremarkable. She filled out paperwork, attended orientation, and started on routine tasks like updating spreadsheets and responding to basic ticket requests. From what I heard through managers, she was competent but quiet, and she adjusted to the structure without complaint. Watching this unfold from a distance was strange. The same person who had always been the center of my parents' pride was now navigating an entry-level job in the company I had built from nothing. There was no satisfaction in it, just a quiet acknowledgement of how life had shifted. I didn't interfere, didn't check on her progress, and didn't mention her to anyone. The company kept growing, adding new features, signing larger clients, and preparing for the next phase of expansion. Revenue projections looked strong, and the team felt solid. Courtney worked steadily for several months, blending into the daily operations like any other employee. My parents still spoke of her as if she was thriving, mentioning in passing how she was back in the game at a tech company without knowing the details. I let it stay that way because the truth would come out on its own time, and I no longer felt the need to force it. The business was mine, the path was mine, and the future was taking shape without their input or approval. Several months into her role, Courtney had settled into the routine of admin support, but her attitude began to stand out in subtle ways. She completed tasks accurately and on time, yet she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had once held a much higher position. In team meetings, she would interject with suggestions phrased as if she were still advising executives rather than entering data and scheduling. Colleagues noticed the tone in her emails, which often included phrases like, "in my experience from previous leadership roles," or "this is how we did it at a larger firm." Managers received occasional feedback that she seemed reluctant to take direction from peers who had been in support longer than her. The real issue surfaced when IT flagged unusual activity on her account. She had accessed internal project folders containing early-stage details for a new feature set that would integrate with major carrier APIs. The logs showed she had downloaded several documents and exported data to her personal drive late at night when the office was empty. This violated company policy on data handling, especially since she had no business need for those files in her current role. The breach wasn't catastrophic, but it was deliberate, and it raised immediate concerns about potential misuse, whether to leverage for personal gain or to share with external contacts from her old network. HR launched a quiet review, pulling the logs, interviewing her direct supervisor, and consulting with legal to ensure the process followed protocol. Courtney was called into a meeting with the HR director and her manager, where she was presented with the evidence. She explained it as curiosity, saying she wanted to understand the bigger picture to do her job better, but the explanation didn't hold up against the timestamps and file sizes. The decision was made to address it internally, without public escalation, to avoid disruption in the department. Instead of termination, she received a formal written warning, a mandatory training on data security, and immediate transfer to a satellite office on the outskirts of Charlotte. The new location was a small facility with fewer people focused on back-office support for regional clients. It meant longer commute for her, reduced visibility within the main team, and no access to core development systems. She accepted the transfer without argument, though the change clearly stung. From reports that came back, she performed the work assigned, but the previous overconfidence had diminished. She kept to herself more, and interactions with colleagues became strictly professional. I was briefed on the situation by the HR director, who knew nothing of our family connection. I approved the handling as standard procedure, emphasizing that the company prioritized trust and security above all else. There was no confrontation, no direct conversation between us. I didn't reach out, and she didn't attempt to contact me either. The incident remained contained within HR records, and the team moved forward without further issues. Courtney continued in the satellite role for the remainder of the year, adjusting to the quieter environment and the reduced scope of her responsibilities. Meanwhile, the main office pushed ahead with product launches, new integrations, and a growing client base that pushed revenue closer to the 20 million mark. The platform had become reliable enough that larger shippers began inquiring, and the team expanded to handle the increased load. The whole episode reinforced something I had learned early on: trust once broken is hard to rebuild, and boundaries exist for a reason. I didn't feel vindicated or bitter, just resolved to protect what I had built. The company was thriving on its own momentum, and I was content to let the rest play out naturally. Recently, when I turned 32, My parents sent an invitation to their 40th wedding anniversary celebration at a country club just outside Charlotte. The envelope was thick cream cardstock with gold lettering and a handwritten note from my mother that read, "It would mean a lot if you came." I hadn't attended a family event in years, but something about the milestone made me decide to go. I accepted RSVP'd quietly and planned my arrival carefully. The evening arrived clear and cool with the parking lot already full when I pulled up 20 minutes late. I stepped out of the car in a tailored charcoal suit, soft navy pocket square, and polished shoes, simple but sharp enough to stand out without trying too hard. The valet nodded as I handed over the keys, and I walked inside, where the ballroom glowed with warm lighting chandeliers and tables set for a formal dinner. Relatives milled around in clusters, laughing and catching up, while a string quartet played softly in the corner. I moved through the room slowly, letting people notice me one by one. A few cousins blinked in surprise, an aunt paused mid-sentence, and my parents spotted me near the bar. My father approached first, his face a mix of surprise and something like pride. "Kaylee, you made it," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. My mother followed, hugging me tightly and whispering, "You look wonderful, sweetie." They didn't ask about my work or my life, just ushered me to a table near the front where extended family was seated. I took my place quietly, greeting people with nods and brief hellos. Dinner proceeded with toasts and stories. Midway through dessert, my father stood up with his glass raised and the room quieted. He thanked everyone for coming, then turned his attention to my parents' marriage and the family they had built. "We're especially grateful for our daughter Courtney," he said, his voice steady with emotion. "She's had some challenges, but she bounced back strong. She's working at a solid tech company now, and she's showing the resilience we always knew she had." My mother nodded, smiling through tears. "She never gives up," she added. "That's our girl." The table applauded politely, and Courtney smiled modestly from her seat. I listened without reacting, keeping my expression neutral. When the clapping died down, my mother looked around the room and said, "Does anyone else have something to say?" A cousin suggested I speak, and before I could decline, my father gestured toward me. "Go on, Kaylee. Say a few words." I stood up, walked to the front, and took the microphone from the stand. The room fell quiet. I adjusted the mic slightly, looked out at the faces, and spoke in a calm, even tone. "I wasn't planning to speak tonight, but since I'm here, I'll say this. 5 years ago at a family dinner, my father told me I was useless and not worth investing in. My mother told me to get out and survive on my own. I left that night and I haven't looked back." I paused, letting the words settle. A few people shifted in their seats. What they didn't know then, and what some of you still don't know, is that I built a company from nothing. It's a logistics platform that now serves hundreds of clients across the region. And Courtney has been part of that journey too. She works in entry-level admin support at my company. She's been there for over a year. The room went completely silent. Forks stopped halfway to mouths, glasses were set down slowly, and eyes turned from me to Courtney to my parents. My father's face froze. My mother's hand went to her mouth, and Courtney stared at me with wide eyes. I didn't raise my voice, didn't add drama. I simply handed the mic back to the MC, nodded once, and walked off the stage. I didn't wait for reactions. I collected my coat from the check and left through the main doors. The night air felt crisp against my skin as I waited for the valet. Behind me, the murmur of voices started to rise, but I didn't turn around. The truth was out plain and straightforward, just as I had intended. The drive home was quiet. I didn't feel triumphant or angry. What I felt was clarity. For the first time in decades, the narrative wasn't controlled by their version of events. It was mine, and it was honest. A few weeks after the anniversary dinner, the calls and messages started coming in waves. My mother was the first to reach out with a text the morning after the event that simply read, "We need to talk about what happened." I didn't respond. Later that afternoon, my father left a voicemail. his voice tight and controlled, saying, "Kaylee, that was not the time or place for what you did. You embarrassed your sister in front of the whole family. Call me back so we can discuss this properly." I listened to the message once, then deleted it without replying. Courtney contacted me next through email a few days later. The subject line was, "I'm sorry," but the body was brief and guarded. She wrote that she hadn't expected me to say anything that night, and that she was sorry if she had ever made things harder for me growing up. She mentioned she was still adjusting to the transfer and hoped we could move past this. The apology felt half-formed, more like damage control than genuine remorse. I read it twice, then archived it without answering. The tone shifted over the following month as the initial shock wore off and reality set in. My parents began mentioning financial strain in passing during the few group messages that still came through from extended family. My father referenced unexpected repairs on the house and how the market wasn't what it used to be. My mother talked about how Courtney's situation had affected their ability to help with certain bills. They never asked me directly for anything, but the hints were clear. They had relied on Courtney's previous income for support, and now that she was in a lower-paying role, the old safety net was gone. Old debts from years ago resurfaced: credit cards, medical expenses, and the mortgage that had once seemed manageable. One evening, my mother called directly. When I didn't pick up, she left a message that was longer than usual. She said they were proud of what I had built, even if they hadn't realized it before. She added that things were tight, and they were wondering if there might be a way for Courtney to move back to a more stable position at the company. She framed it as a family matter, saying, "We just want everyone to be okay and stable." The word stable carried weight, and I understood what she meant without her spelling it out. They needed reliable income again, and they were looking toward the one person who had it. I didn't call back. Instead, I forwarded the message to my assistant with instructions to keep records in case anything escalated. The company was running smoothly, revenue continued to climb, and the team was focused on the next product release. I had no intention of reopening that door. Courtney sent another email a week later, this one more direct. She acknowledged the transfer had been a consequence of her actions, and she said she understood why it happened. She asked if there was any possibility of returning to the main office, or at least a role with better pay to help with her situation. She mentioned the commute was long and the salary wasn't covering her expenses. Again, there was no full ownership of the breach, just a quiet request for help. I replied once and only once with a short note that read, "The decision stands. HR has the final say on internal placements." That was the end of direct communication from her. The financial pressure became more visible in small ways. A cousin mentioned in passing that my parents had sold some furniture to cover costs. Another relative said my father was looking into part-time work for the first time in decades. They never reached out to me for money directly, perhaps because pride, or perhaps because they knew the answer would be no. The old dynamic had flipped completely, and they were now the ones navigating uncertainty while I remained steady. I felt no urge to rescue them. What I felt was a calm acceptance that this was the natural outcome of years of choices on both sides. They had invested in one child and dismissed the other. Now the investment hadn't paid off as planned, and the dismissed one had built something enduring. There was no satisfaction in their struggle, only a quiet recognition that actions have consequences. The family group chat grew quieter over time. Invitations to holidays stopped coming, and the occasional updates from relatives became less frequent. I didn't initiate contact, and they didn't push further. The distance that had started years ago was now permanent. One crisp fall morning, a few months after the anniversary dinner, I received a call from the front desk at the main office. The receptionist sounded hesitant as she explained that my parents and Courtney were standing at the gate asking to speak with me. They had arrived unannounced in my father's old sedan and were waiting in the visitor parking area. I thanked her for the update, told her to keep them comfortable in the lobby, and said I would handle it from there. I didn't go down to meet them in person. Instead, I drafted a short email from my company account addressed to all three of them. The message was polite but firm. I wrote that I appreciated them coming but that I was unable to meet or discuss employment opportunities. I reminded them that HR policies were clear on hiring decisions and that the company had no openings that matched their qualifications at this time. I closed by saying I built this business on my own, and I wish you the best in finding stability elsewhere. I hit send, copied HR for documentation, and closed the laptop. They didn't leave immediately. From what the security footage later showed, they waited in the lobby for nearly an hour, speaking with the receptionist and a junior manager who had been instructed to stay professional and brief. Eventually, they walked back to the car and drove away. That was the last time they appeared at the office. The gate remained closed to them from then on. Courtney resigned from the satellite office shortly afterward without notice. HR processed the paperwork, and she was gone within the week. My parents stopped all attempts at contact. The group messages dried up, the occasional holiday cards stopped arriving, and the phone calls ceased entirely. No contact became complete and permanent. They faced the consequences of their choices, the loss of Courtney's previous high income, the lingering debts, and the absence of the support they had once taken for granted from me. My father took on part-time consulting work to make ends meet. My mother started selling handmade crafts online, and Courtney eventually found a mid-level administrative job at a smaller firm far from Charlotte. Their lives continued, but without the safety net they had relied on for so long. I turned my attention fully to what mattered. The company kept growing, landing contracts with national carriers, expanding the team to over 60 people, and preparing for a potential acquisition offer that would value the business well into 8 figures. I stayed involved in the strategic decisions, but delegated day-to-day operations to the CEO and his leadership team. The work felt rewarding because it was mine, built from the ground up without anyone else's approval or investment. Outside of work, I reconnected with my cousin Brandon Hayes, who had always been a steady presence even when I was at my lowest. We met for coffee once a month, talked about life, business, and the small things that kept us grounded. He had watched the entire journey from the early days of my warehouse shifts to the quiet success that followed, and his support had been unwavering. Those conversations reminded me that real relationships don't demand performance or perfection. The days settled into a rhythm that felt peaceful in a way I hadn't known before. I woke up each morning without the weight of waiting for someone else's validation. I walked through the office without needing to prove anything. I ended each day knowing that the life I had was the one I had chosen and built entirely on my own terms. I don't need their approval anymore. I built my life on my own terms, and that is enough. This story is about more than one family's choices. It's about what happens when you stop waiting for people to see your worth and start proving it to yourself. The lesson is simple, but powerful. Love and support should never be conditional on success or performance. When they are, the consequences can be painful for everyone involved. But the freedom that comes from walking away from that conditionality is real, and it lasts. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt invisible in your own family or had to choose your own path despite the cost, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your experiences matter, and someone else reading this might need to hear them. I'm grateful you were here with me through this journey. Until the next story, take care of yourselves and remember your worth isn't up for debate.